Welcome to the age of the great guilds.
One of the first games I ever remember playing when I was a little kid was The Secret of Monkey Island. When I was about 3 or 4, I used to sometimes stay up late with my dad in his office. I would sit on his lap and move the mouse while he helped me figure out what I had to do. I only really managed about 15 minutes of the insult-based sword fighting before I got sent to bed. But to this day, it is one of my strongest memories of my life before I turned 5 and my parents split up. Fast forward about 4 or 5 years later, when I was around 9 years old, me and my big sister would visit my dad and stepmom every other weekend. Just like when I was a kid, I used to enjoy playing the games my dad had on his PC, usually shareware floppy disks he had got from magazines. It was from this era that I found my love for games like the original Duke Nukem, Jazz Jack Rabbit and The Lost Vikings. I remember there was always one game that stood out way more than the rest. Primarily because it was on a CD instead of a floppy disk, but also because it came in a full box all of its own instead of being shoved inside floppy containers with hundreds of other random discs. If you haven't guessed already, that game was Loom. Immediately it struck me that it must be something different, because not only did it come with an audio CD which you were supposed to listen to beforehand, but it also had an extra booklet which did much more than a manual, the Book of Patterns. Obviously, these days, I know that lots of old PC games came with extras back in the day, like cloth maps or an in-universe operations manual. But back then, it was such a revelation that a game could consist of more than what came on the actual disc. To me, Loom is a special game because of the story it tries to tell and the atmosphere it managed to create with its fully narrated dialogue and introductory audio drama. It was the first game I had played as a kid that made me interested in the world instead of just interested in playing the actual game. The world that Loom takes place in is filled with these different guilds, which basically run different industries or aspects in the world. There is the Guild of Smiths, who control producing all of the world's metal goods, usually swords. There's the Guild of Shepherds, who look after the world's livestock. Obviously this actually just consists of sheep, but still. The Glassmakers Guild produce crystals, which can see into the future, as well as a scythe that can cut through anything, for some reason. Finally, there is the Guild of Weavers, a group of hood-wearing magicians who alter the world around them using music-based spells. You're introduced to the main character, Bobbin Threadbare. Okay, no one said that the names were good, as he sits high above his village, alone on his birthday. He is approached by a magically produced sprite, who tells him the village elders want to see him. And just like that, our story begins. All of his life, Bobbin has been actively shunned by his village elders, and never taught even the simplest of spells. As the game opens, you find out that he was a child pulled out of the loom itself, a big device kept safe by the Weavers, which can be used to alter huge swathes of reality in a single swoop. The elders feared what Bobbin's birth could mean for the world, and their own lives, and so kept him as far away from magic as possible. Now, with the island of Weavers crumbling and deserted, Bobbin must set out to find out what is going on in the world, and be reunited with whatever remains of his own kind. There is a lot more to this game's narrative than what I've already talked about, but I don't want to ruin the story for anyone who hasn't had a chance to play the game yet. The real attraction for Loom, from a gameplay perspective, is the fact that it's a point-and-click game which uses a very unique system with absolutely no inventory. You see, instead of running around collecting items and repeatedly trying to use Object A on Object B until you win, you have to learn different magical spells, called patterns, and use them to affect the world around you. You can pick up a fair few on the starting island before you even set out on your quest, and the environment gives you the perfect area to figure out how the game works before getting you into the actual puzzles themselves. Each pattern is made up of 4 different musical notes, but at first, you can only weave patterns with the first few notes. As you go along with your adventure, you become more powerful and gain access to the higher notes. When you learn a pattern, you're supposed to write it down in the book of patterns so that you can remember it for later. But I would recommend that you write it down on a piece of paper, even if you actually own a boxed copy. You see, the patterns can change depending on which difficulty setting you picked, so if you write a certain pattern down in the book, then you can end up coming to regret it later. It is still important to write them down, however, even if you think you have a really good memory. Firstly, there are quite a lot of patterns to learn throughout the game, but secondly, not only do you have to be able to play them as you learned them, but at certain points in the game, you need to cast them backwards to get the opposite effect. The puzzles are never too hard to figure out, and mainly just rely on you having explored the world thoroughly and remaining observant enough to actually have learned all of the available patterns. On your first time through the game, it will probably take you barely an hour to complete, and every subsequent playthrough can be as short as 20 minutes if you really rush through everything. Not that you'll want to. The game looks beautiful, but never gets so graphically complex that you can't tell what something is supposed to be. The biggest disappointment for this game is probably the fact that it was supposed to set up a trilogy of games, which featured the adventures of the different guilds as they tried to stop the world from ripping itself apart. Unfortunately, for whatever reason, the rest of the games never got made. Apparently, it had something to do with the general lack of interest amongst the developers to actually continue the series. The biggest surprise for me has always been that no fans have tried to continue the series themselves. The unique style of the gameplay has gained the game a pretty big cult following over the years. The real reason for me that Loom is so special is probably because the world it creates is pretty damn magical, and I find myself really connecting with some of the characters and their relationships. I love the bumbling, good-natured Bobbin, and the loving relationship with the woman who raised him, even to the point that she puts her life and reputation on the line for him multiple times. I think that something really interesting could have been done with the games that were supposed to follow it, and their focus on the different guilds. Me and the rest of the fans of this game will have to keep praying for a new entry to the series, and in the meantime, keep practicing our patterns. Hey, thank you guys for watching this first episode in our Why We Love This series. If you really like Loom, say so in the comments and tell us why, or just about your favourite game. Also, like and subscribe and share with everyone, and yeah, you know what you're doing.